So I would like to thank you all again for coming today. We're going to go on with our agenda so that we give Congresswoman Bice as much time as possible to speak. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a little time for Q&A if you want to be thinking about any questions you might want to ask. The Petroleum Club staff is going to go ahead and also serve dessert. So as we get started, they'll bring out dessert. And by the way, please feel free to continue with your lunch. We expect you to be able to eat. We just want to give as much time as we have. So Brett Farley is the executive director of the Oklahoma Catholic Conference. You want to raise your hand, Brett? This is Brett. For those of you who don't know, I'm the parishioner at St. Monica. And he is a longtime friend of Stephanie Bice and helped us secure Congresswoman Bice's participation in the Assembly of Catholic Professionals. And I want to thank Brett for all the work that he does for the Catholic community in the State House here in Oklahoma and beyond. Some of you may know she's been in Oklahoma a long time. She's fourth generation Oklahoman and Catholic at St. Eugene, my parish. She is still one at St. Eugene, I think, right? One at Bishop. Sorry, we transitioned up a year. McGinnis and one at Oklahoma State. Yes, talking points are no. Before she took office, Stephanie worked in financial oversight, business strategy, technology company, and then as we modernized Oklahoma's liquor laws, resulting in new jobs as wineries, and a particular favorite of a few people at Table 1, the distilleries are opened in our state. Creating distilleries is a kind of a fun side hobby for Table 1. Stephanie is currently serving as the Congresswoman for Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District. Please welcome Congresswoman Stephanie Bice.
Well, before I get started, I will mention that when I was working on alcohol modernization, people would ask me, why are you doing this? And my response was, well, I'm Catholic and I drink wine on Sunday and I want everyone else to have the same opportunity. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. It is truly an honor to be here standing before you as the Congresswoman from the 5th District. And after I won the election, I think it was probably a couple of days, I get a text message from my friend, Brett Farley, and he says, I'd like you to speak at the Catholic Professionals luncheon. I said, I just won the election, give me a bit, True story, right? Yeah, so. Before I go into my legislative sort of update and we take questions, I want to share, I think, some of my faith journey and how I got here. I was raised in a home that was not particularly religious. My parents didn't go to church on a regular basis. My mom was one of 3 from a father who was Baptist, and my aunts were one of 3 more that were raised by a Catholic father. But we never really went to services growing up, and my grandfather would take me occasionally, but that was really the extent. And I remember thinking to myself at a young age, high school and college, that I wanted to be Catholic, but I really didn't know why, other than the fact that my aunts and uncle had been through Villa Teresa, and I loved the traditionalism and the symbolism of church. It meant something. And it didn't matter where you went, whether it's Oklahoma City or Washington, D.C., the readings were responsorials were the same. And that I thought was really important. So fast forward to August of '93. I'm sitting on a fire escape, talking to this cute guy. And we discussed everything under the sun. And I looked at him and I said, do you go to church? And he said, and I remember thinking to myself, he's it. I'm going to marry him. Jeff and I have been married 25 years this January. I didn't voice that thought in my head to him that evening. We had been talking for a couple of days, so that might have scared him off a bit. But I think that really began my faith journey, as meeting someone that I think shared the same values and the same thought about religion, which is one of the reasons why when we were discussing children, that I told him, he was a graduate of St. Charles and Bishop McGinnis, and I said, have the ability to send our children to Catholic school, because I think that faith-based education is incredibly important, and we've been very blessed to be able to do that. So, my father-in-law likes to joke, actually, and I think he's in the same boat that I am, that we're more devout Catholics than the cradle chose to the Catholic side. Many politicians, I think, struggle with their faith. To be obedient to God and faithful to the teachings of Jesus in this time has really become a political statement of its own. And I shared with the table earlier a story deciding to do an interfaith week when I was in the state Senate. Over the Senate every day. Leader. I invited an LDS bishop, I invited a rabbi and an AME pastor. Because none of those faiths had ever had the opportunity to pray over the Senate before. And Governor Keating and I were when I shared that story, Governor said, well, actually, I may have been the first one to ask for a Catholic to come and say prayers over the Senate when he was in the state legislature. So I feel like we're making progress. We're coming a long way, but it's difficult sometimes to really show that faith. There are not very many Catholics in the Oklahoma State Legislature, as I found out. There's like 6 of them, roughly. There's a lot more now in D.C., so that's a good thing, even though we don't always agree on the issues. But my faith gives values to withstand the present. And it's helped me, as I'm sure it's helped each of you, find the strength needed to move forward, do what I believe I've been called to. In the community that inspired my friend who is a Catholic in 2013 about running for the state Senate. The necessity to lean on faith for courage and strength when dealing with a room full of beer and liquor distributors, telling them my plans for state liquor laws was very much needed. But also working with constituents, working with Allie Dodd, who is a mother that I met very early on in my tenure, whose child had died at an in-home daycare. I worked with her for several years to get legislation passed for safe sleep initiatives, because it was incredibly important to her to experience that. And her devotion and her commitment to the cause made me recognize that these are the things that I'm being called to do, to help other families, to be of service. That's why I was elected. While my faith has certainly helped me in distressing times, it's also helped at the Capitol. Voting in support that protect life and that maintain religious freedom. And sometimes those are really, really tough. You hear from a lot of people that are angry for trying to protect religious liberties in the state. But it's my duty and obligation to do that very thing. In a society that is growing radically more secular every day, I'd say we have more to fear from those who let their politics determine their faith, or those who substitute politics for faith, or who let the news and social media tell us how we should think, or live, or vote. We as Christians need to be more determined to look introspectively and rediscover the biblical foundations. Our focus really shouldn't be on political party winning, but putting Christ first and foremost in our lives and at the center of all we do. Before I move forward with a legislative update, I do want to take a moment to thank Archbishop Coakley for his leadership on a number of issues across the state of Oklahoma. Your pro-life stance, not just on human life, as well as the defense of religious liberty, I think is something to be incredibly commended. So thank you for that. So since November the 3rd, let's talk about what I have been doing in Washington. First, some highlights. I was incredibly honored to be elected by my freshman classmates as the freshman class president. 45 Republicans decided they wanted me to be their leader. Thank you. What's really amazing about that is I am actually the first female Republican president ever to be elected. And one of the reasons I even considered running back in 2014 was because there were not enough women serving in the state legislature. At the time, there were 4 out of 48 in the Senate, and 13 out of 101 in the state house. And being the mother of daughters, I sort of thought, hey, this is an opportunity for me to do something big and maybe change the alcohol laws in the process. But so I did. So it's an honor for me to be in that role. I was placed on 2 committees, House Armed Services Committee. Many of you recognize the importance of armed services to the Oklahoma City community. Although Tinker Air Force Base is not part of Congressional District 5, many of the 25,000 civilians that work on the base live in the 5th District. And so making sure that we're advocating for those important issues is incredibly important. So I was honored to be placed on that committee. I'm also part of the Space and Technology Committee. And we really are focusing on innovation, the future, and one of the subcommittees that I'm actually the ranking member on, which is the lead Republican, is the Environmental Committee. And there is a lot of conversation going on around environmental issues, particularly as it relates to Oklahoma right now. So excited to be a part of that. As well as a supply chain task force committee that was stood up this Congress. Talk about issues. I think many of us saw the challenges after COVID-19 hit last year, trying to obtain things like PPE, gloves, hand sanitizer. That was a small part of, I think, the supply chain challenges that we face. And so we're looking at, from a holistic perspective, how do we address that to make sure we don't have those sort of issues in the future? Some of the real, I think, important issues to Oklahoma, the American energy executive orders that we've seen on from the administration. You know, it was pretty disappointing because it was one of the very first things that the administration signed, revoking the Keystone XL pipeline, as well as putting a moratorium on drilling on federal lands. And certainly, I think oil and gas companies strive every day to be environmentally conscious and do the things that are right. But banning these types of activities actually puts Oklahoma and the United States at a disadvantage. We are relying on foreign entities to provide oil and gas to our country. And we fought as a country for so long to become energy independent that taking that step back is very problematic. It's also affecting jobs. And people have said to me many times, well, there's no Oklahoma companies that are, part of the Keystone XL or drilling on federal lands, and actually that's not true. There are, and I had a service company reach out to me right after the exec order was signed into law that said that he was immediately having to lay off about 500 employees that worked for his company because of that one decision. In addition to sort of putting a moratorium, we've also seen energy prices start to increase. Price of gasoline has gone up 62 cents since January. The good news is Oklahoma is still in the top 10. I know that's the governor's line, but I'm going to steal it from him. Least expensive states for gasoline, averaging about $2.65 right now. That being said, and we are seeing it today in this room, as more vaccines become available, workers are returning to the office. My husband's returning next month. I think that's probably a good thing for him. Kids are returning to school. Demand for gas is going to increase, and my fear is that prices will follow. Policies that have been passed in the recent years have really helped us launch an energy revitalization across the U.S., and I hope that we can continue that. Infrastructure, or what's been dubbed as the American Jobs Plan. The administration and Democrats are proposing a $2.7 trillion plan, and it's incredibly concerning. I think we can all agree. How many of you have driven on I-235 recently? We can all agree that infrastructure is incredibly important, and I think that project sort of highlights that. Unfortunately, what's in this particular piece of legislation is a whole lot more than roads and bridges and electric infrastructure and broadband. It includes funding for the National Science Foundation, long-term care, corporate child care, and electric car company subsidies. And again, some of these issues, the child care one being an example, these are really important issues, but I don't think that they should be part of an infrastructure package. And I don't think that not allowing debate and discussion and discourse around what the true needs are right now, given the economic challenges we've seen over the last year, we need to be having some robust conversations about what's part of that and what's not, because putting a burden on small businesses right now is completely the wrong strategy. And part of paying for this infrastructure package is an increase in corporate taxes, small business taxes, personal income tax. And I don't think that it's sustainable. I learned in the first few weeks of my tenure that right after we passed this most recent COVID relief package, which was $1.9 trillion, I was having a conversation with a senior member, and he said to me, "Did you know that the discretionary spending on an annual basis that Congress has the ability to approve is roughly $1.3 trillion? We had just spent more money in that COVID relief package than Congress appropriates in an entire year for discretionary spending. And now we're on the same path to do something along the lines of this infrastructure package. Under the Biden plan, the combined federal and state corporate tax rates would go from 25.8, already have an average rate of 23 in other developed countries, to 32%, the highest developed in the world. It's actually higher than China. And I think that these abrupt tax hikes would reduce the competitiveness of American workers and businesses right as our economy is starting to rebound from the pandemic. Studies from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office show that workers will bear most of the burden of higher rates in the form of lower wages and lost jobs. The reality is the Democrats have enough votes in the House to pass the bill without any Republican support. And they have done that with almost every other very partisan bill that we've seen come before Congress since the beginning of January. My hope is that we can have a true conversation about what's important and what makes sense and what truly is infrastructure driven and what's not, because that's what the country wants. I think, especially when I'm out talking to groups, they really want government to function again. They want us to have robust conversations. They want us to have discussions about what's important and what's not, but they want us to get things done at the end of the day. And I want that too. You've probably heard quite a bit about H.R. 1. That is an election security, I'll use that in air quotes a little bit, bill that has been put forth, already passed the House, and is sitting waiting for the Senate to consider it. And again, going back to sort of the lack of discussion, there was no bipartisan support of this bill. As a matter of fact, there was actually bipartisan opposition to this particular piece of legislation. And what most people aren't talking about in election reform is a piece that's sort of hidden in the bill that I think is unbelievably egregious, and that is this. It allows the federal government to fund political campaigns with a 6-to-1 match of up to $200. So, not that this would happen, but if the Archbishop were to give me $200, the federal government would match that contribution 6-to-1. Now, I don't think that that's what Oklahoma taxpayers want done with their hard-earned taxpayer dollars. It is a federal overhaul of elections, which the election provisions are specifically given to government states. Representative Cal as Commissioner Cowley has maybe stepped out, but the Constitution is very clear. Time, place, and manner by which elections are to be held are determined by state legislatures. And as a former member of a state legislature, I actually oversaw the election board. And when this bill came before Congress, I received a letter from Paul Xerox, who was the secretary of the election board. And the letter implored the delegation not to support the bill because there were many pieces of it that were incredibly problematic. Think about this. One of the provisions is same-day voter registration. How do you guarantee the security or outcome of an election when you have same-day voter registration? One of the things that I learned in overseeing the election board is that Oklahoma has one of, if not the best election system in the entire country. It is efficient, it is secure, and you know election results the night of the election. A couple of my freshman colleagues waited days, weeks. One of them waited 3 months to find out whether or not she would be seated as a member of Congress. And this particular For the People Act, H.R. 1, is completely counter to what Oklahoma has chosen to do, and I think it's incredibly disappointing that we're having that conversation. Let me talk about the positives for a second. My first piece of legislation that I filed is a bipartisan piece of legislation with Sarah Jacobs, who is a Democrat from San Diego. And it was a direct result of some committee hearings that we were having around military housing. The bill is called the Protecting Military Families with Disabilities Act. And the purpose of the bill is to ensure that our military families do not have to endure paying for ADA upgrades to military housing. We found out that this is happening across the country. And imagine, for those of you that have a military family or are familiar, typically every couple of years you're moving. Can you imagine if you have a child with a disability and you move to a housing to base and there's no housing for your child, and then they tell you, oh, by the way, thanks for serving our country, but we're going to charge you to put these ADA upgrades into the home. So we filed the legislation, and what's really exciting is we've been told that it's actually going to be put into the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, which we believe will pass later this summer. I'm also part of, I mentioned this, Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and that committee focuses on a variety of issues. By the way, next Monday I think I'm going to SpaceX launch. That might be kind of cool. But one of the things that we're really looking at is research and development. R&D dollars are incredibly important, and when the pandemic hit, you saw a lot of research come to a screeching halt. People weren't able to go to the labs, they weren't able to start new projects, and so we've fallen behind. And make no mistake, we're in a race with our foreign adversaries, China, Russia, North Korea. And we need to be making sure that we're investing heavily in research and development so that we don't fall behind. My ranking member in the committee, Frank Lucas, filed a bill last year called the Solstice Securing American Leadership in Science and Technology Act, which invests $25 billion into research in a variety of areas, but I think it's important that we keep up that research funding. I want to say thank you again for taking time out of your afternoon. It's great to see people in a room together. We haven't done that in a while. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you a brief update. I am honored to be in this position. I'm honored to serve, and truly that is why I'm here. So if there's anything my office can ever do to assist, please don't hesitate to reach out. Log on to the website, find me on social media, and please let us know how we can be of service to you. Thank you.
Don't fall. Thank you, Stephanie. So we have about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has any. And I just ask, would you repeat whatever questions into the microphone so for the video? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Was our Roman Catholic president, Biden, was he legitimately elected?
So the question was our Roman Catholic president, Biden, legitimately elected? Look, I think there were certainly...
I think it's like yes or no.
He's serving, he's the president. I think he's, based on what we know currently, I think that you could, yeah, he's seated, he's serving. Were there questions about the election? Certainly. I had concerns about election security in some states, but he is the sitting president. Hey, Bruce. Yes.
What are your thoughts on the status of the so-called Equality Act? Is that going anywhere?
Thank you. So the question was, what is the status of the Equality Act? The Equality Act is legislation that would, as it sort of tries to allude to, make sex, you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, right? There are a lot of concerns from a religious liberties perspective on that legislation. I think you've heard a lot of people bring that up lately. And I don't think that that's actually going to get heard in the Senate. I think there are too many concerns and questions from senators about some of the provisions within that. And some of those are pro-life provisions, actually. So I don't know that that's going to get passed. We'll have to wait and see. Yes.
Unpacking the Supreme Court with the majority Democrats have now, is that possible between now and the midterms?
So the question was about packing the Supreme Court and whether or not that would be possible between now and the Supreme Court. That is a really interesting conversation that's been going on for quite some time now. And the bill has passed the House, or I'm sorry, it's being proposed, but what I think is that no, I don't think it'll ever get through. You have people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who were very clear that the Supreme Court should not be made a political weapon. And it seems to me that that's exactly what Democrats want to do is pack the court, because they didn't like the fact that President Trump got so many appointments, that they want to balance it out, and so they want to try to take this avenue. I don't think that that's a popular narrative with the general public, and I don't think it'll actually go anywhere. It's a good question. You actually, and I want to bring up one other maybe topic that seems to be pretty prominent, and that's the DC statehood conversation, sort of on the same tone of being political. There's been a fight for quite some time, and if you go to Washington, D.C. and you drive through the community, you see all of these signs that are put everywhere that say, taxation without representation, and they've been fighting for statehood for quite some time. I voted no for D.C. statehood. I don't think it was ever intended to be a state. The founding fathers were very clear. It's a district. It was meant to be that way. And I signed on to some legislation that actually would de-annex, if you will, the lands around the capital, the D.C. district, back to Maryland and Virginia. That really solves the problem. If they want representation, well, then you have it. But one thing that people don't probably realize is that the Washington, D.C. area is highly subsidized by the federal government. So you're talking about increased taxes for those folks, and I don't think they even realize that.
Stephanie, I have a question. So I'm a bit of a SpaceX geek, and I love...
I can't take you with me, Peter, sorry.
I'm gonna go. I'll volunteer. In fact, on my way to Oklahoma 5 years ago, we saw one Falcon 9 launch, actually. My family went to Florida on the way to Oklahoma from Chicago.
That was on the way.
I'm not sure how you got to Chicago back to, yeah, okay. Keep going.
Falcon 9 is big. But one of the brilliant things that happened, you've got Elon Musk, who started Tesla and Solar City and SpaceX, et cetera. But really, what has advanced the technology in space to allow, now we're talking about going back to the moon and on to Mars, is really the federal government kind of stepping aside and letting private companies come forth in a really hyper-competitive way and change the whole R&D structure of how space, all of the resulting technologies happen. How do you feel about the role of government versus letting those companies go?
Repeat the question.
Yeah.
Yes. How do I repeat that question? The question really is around private sector supporting sort of government initiatives. And we saw this even on the state level. These public-private partnerships are incredibly important. And especially when you're talking about things that are either technology-driven or maybe very, very innovative. I think there's no better way to do it than bringing in the outside and sort of subsidizing them. And you're seeing a race right now. SpaceX has done an incredible job, but you're also seeing Blue Origin, which is a Bezos spinoff that is also competing for that same type of business. And so you're driving competition, which is a good thing. You're driving innovation. And we're seeing, I believe, a much faster space race than we saw before SpaceX was actually involved. And so I think those public-private partnerships are a really good thing. Yeah. One more? Last question? Okay. Danny.
Can you give us a hint about the midterm elections?
So the question was hints about the midterm elections. Historically, the opposing party of the president gains seats in a midterm election cycle, an average of 26 or 27. So right now, the House is split. It's a 5-seat difference right now, Republican to Democrat. And we believe that there's a good chance that Republicans will take back the House. And I think that the important aspect of that is that it balances things out, right? Now the Democrats are forced to come to the table and have conversations. Right now they're able to push anything they want through, and they have been. When I was first elected, I found out that if a bill passed in the 116th Congress last term, that they could run it through the 117th without going through committee. And that's what they did with many of the policy initiatives that you saw. They bypassed committee, brought it straight to the floor to vote on, and there were no amendments, there was no discussion from the Republican side. I think that our hope is that, yes, we'll be able to fight to take the House back and at least bring some balance of power back to Washington. So thank you all again for your time today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'd like to thank you all again for coming today. Please don't forget, if you've turned in your ticket to be validated for parking, feel free to do so. At the same time, there's membership forms for the Assembly of Catholic Professionals on your tables if you're interested. Our next luncheon is August 5th with Bishop David Congela back here at the Petroleum Club. He'll be a great speaker. Oh, yes, thank you. On your table is a flower arrangement. Please, one person per table, take them with you. We'd love for you to take them home. Mother's Day gift. That's a great idea. All right, I get number 6. Just kidding. Please invite your friends to come along. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and have a great afternoon.